Snow fell in thin, quiet sheets, settling on the mailbox and muffling the distant clatter of a city that never fully slept. Inside a modest house on Maple Street, a single light burned over the kitchen table, casting a warm circle on the worn wood where three small hands had left smudges of crayon and flour. The voice that used to fill that room with jokes and bad songs was gone for nearly 2 years, and the silence had learned the shape of the furniture. Three little girls, identical except for the tiny braid on one and the gap tooth on another, sat around the table and hatched a plan that smelled of cinnamon and childhood courage. They did not want toys. They wanted their father back in the ordinary ways he had been missing, washing a mug, tying a shoelace, reading the same page of a picture book until sleep won. With shaky letters and a clumsy heart, they wrote a note and tucked it inside a donated mitten at the corner market, trusting that paper could carry longing. Across town, a nurse on her way home from a long shift stopped for oranges and found the mitten. The handwriting was so small and sincere that it pricked a place she kept locked under her own uniform. If a mitten and a letter could move someone to visit, what might happen if a stranger chose to stay? This is a quiet story about how one small visit became the first stitch in mending a home. The girls were Lily, June, and Nora Bennett, and they were 7 years old, born in the same long winter and used to finishing each other's sentences. Their father, Thomas Bennett, had once been the kind of man who hummed while he chopped vegetables and left a single light on in the hallway for his daughters to find when they came home from school. After the accident, he kept the light but stopped humming. He worked at the warehouse on Willow Lane, came home with hands that smelled of cardboard and cold, and learned to keep his feelings in a pocket like a hand warmer that never warmed. The house still remembered the way their mother had arranged ribbon on the curtains before she left 5 years earlier. Neighbors talked in soft syllables about grief and patience. The triplets decided that patience alone was not enough. At the market, Raj the grocer hummed a Christmas jingle and stacked the citrus in neat pyramids. He watched the mitten tucked between canned tomatoes and holiday napkins, then saw Maya Reyes lift it with a puzzled smile. Maya was a nurse who had worked nights in the community clinic for years. She kept a small jar of tea and an old recipe card in the pocket of her coat, and she had a way of noticing what people tried to hide behind polite faces. The mitten had a note folded inside with childish scrawl that said, "Please, visit our lonely dad." Maya read it twice, then aloud in a soft tone, as if the words might find a way to a heart overhearing. She bought the oranges, and she bought a plan. The first scene they staged was small and deliberate. The girls made a tin of cookies using the mix that had come from Mrs. Alvarez next door, who always saved eggshells for her compost. The kitchen filled with aroma of butter and brown sugar, of orange zest, of vanilla that escaped the bottle like a laugh. There were 5 sensory moments in that afternoon alone. The sticky press of dough between fingers, the crackle of the oven door, the warmth of the cookie sheet when Lily lifted it with an old towel, the taste of a burnt edge that Nora declared heroic, and the sound of June humming to an imaginary radio. They wrapped the cookies in a napkin and wrote, "Father, please come to tea." They walked the snowed lane together until they reached the mailbox that had a notice taped to it about lost packages. They placed the folded note into the donation mitten and pressed a kiss to the fabric as if that could be an anchor. Maya found the note on her kitchen table that night like a new kind of map. She reread the tiny pleading words and thought of her patients who arrived at dawn with stories full of things they could not fix alone. Her own backstory was a long and winding thing. As a girl, she had grown up in a small apartment above a bakery where mornings smelled of yeast, and the street vendor Mr. Patel called her by a childhood nickname. She trained as a nurse because she liked order, and because she wanted to be the person who could put a cool cloth on a fevered head and hand someone a glass of water without asking for thanks.
Then she had lost her brother to an illness that taught her the limits of medicine and the need for presence. She stayed in nursing because it let her sit with people in their edges of fear and sometimes help them find a way back to ordinary days. She kept a small stack of letters in a tin under her sink, letters from patients who had written to say a word of thanks, and she read them when the nights were long and the city felt too sharp. The note written by 3 small girls fit into that tin like a promise. Maya had learned to trust small gestures. There was a pattern in her life. A patient who left a sweater at the clinic, a neighbor who baked extra bread, a coworker who stayed late to fill in. Names mattered. She remembered the first patient who had taught her not to rush goodbyes, a man named Jacob who insisted on telling his stories twice to be sure they were heard. She thought of
her friend Marco, who always brought a thermos of soup during blizzards, and of Miss Harper, the school teacher who greeted the children each morning with a smile that could untie knots. She imagined ringing the Bennett doorbell and feeling awkward, like a character in an old play stepping into a scene without rehearsal. But she also imagined the smell of the cookies and the way the girls had pressed hope into paper. She bundled a coat, wrapped the tin of cookies in wax paper, and decided to knock. On the Bennett porch, the snow dripped slowly from the eaves. Tom opened the door with the kind of caution that comes from lifting a lid on a memory. He looked at the nurse standing with flour on her cuffs and a tin in her hands. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sensory details stacked, the cold on Maya's cheeks, the faint scent of wood smoke in the hallway, the rough texture of Tom's mitten, the quiet tick of a clock that had once been loud enough to be a drum. The sight of a photograph taped to the hall mirror with 3 smaller versions of the girls laughing at a picnic. Maya put the cookies down on the counter like an offering. The first scene of connection began with a simple exchange and then unfolded into 8 to 10 small conversations that shifted the room. They spoke about weather and work. Lily asked him how the warehouse managed snow days. June offered a fact about trains that she had learned from a neighbor named Caleb who delivered parcels on his route and loved telling trivia. Nora, with the gap in her teeth, asked if he liked cinnamon. Tom's voice cracked when he thanked Maya for bringing the cookies. Maya said it was nothing, but she meant that everything was nothing and everything at the same time. Tom admitted he had not made tea in months. Maya offered to show him a trick for steeping with a spoon and a lid. He laughed like someone finding a warm glove. The conversation moved from small detail to a softer honesty as Maya asked how he had been sleeping, and Tom said poorly because of the silence that had grown around him. Maya did not tell him to be brave. She told him how she learned to make a loaf of bread once after a long night and how the smell anchored her like a compass. That night they drank tea and listened to the girls tell ridiculous stories. Each line of dialogue carried texture. The scrape of a chair, the clink of a spoon, the whisper of paper as a card was unfolded, the girls giggling at a memory only they held. By the time Maya left, there was a new rhythm, a small pulse of sound in a house that had learned to be quiet. A day or 2 after that first visit, the neighborhood took notice. Mrs. Alvarez brought extra sugar and a jar of molasses from her pantry. Raj, the grocer, noticed that Tom had begun buying bread again and commented on a new light in his stride. Ivy, a cousin who lived 2 blocks over, offered to help with school pickups, and Tim, the postman, slowed his route to chat about soccer. These secondary characters had names and small deeds. Raj stacked oranges higher than usual and slipped an extra satsuma into the girl's hands. Mrs. Alvarez mended a mitten with careful red thread and left it on the fence. Marco texted Maya with a thumbs up and an offer to fix the leaky sink. Miss Harper sent home a drawing the girls had made in class. Each name attached to an action that moved the story forward and held the community together in a loose, real way. The story deepened when Maya revealed a part of herself in 3 brief backstory paragraphs that connected directly to why she could not walk away.
She had spent a childhood hearing the rumble of the bakery ovens because her mother worked nights and left morning notes on the table. She took those notes to heart and learned that tasks done for someone else can be prayers. In nursing school, she had once patched a child who kept asking for a sliver of light under the curtains. She learned then that presence was sometimes more powerful than medicine. After losing her brother, Maya sat in the quiet of her apartment and taught herself to make one perfect soup, a recipe from an aunt named Rosa that she would share only with people who needed comfort. Those 3 paragraphs were not a confession, but a map for her decisions. They explained to a listening reader why a nurse who had seen hard things would choose to bring cookies and remain for tea instead of moving on to the next call. There were 3 moments of tension that pushed the story to its edges. The first came one week in when a blizzard hit and the power flickered out. The girls wanted a wish game and lit a cluster of battery candles while the house leaned into sound and memory. Tom sat with his hands folded as if holding a secret. Maya watched him and felt the old familiar urge to fix the unfixable. The silence stretched like wet fabric, and then Tom spoke abruptly about a regret he had kept folded away. Maya did not judge him. She listened. The electricity returned, and with it a small sob that surprised them all. In that dark and then light, they learned how a confession can be a bridge. The second moment arrived when Maya received a job offer to work another clinic farther away, a chance to lead a small team, and a promotion that would mean longer hours but better pay. She found the notice tucked under a stack of clinic forms and stared at it in the car while the girls
Waved from the sidewalk. She imagined the commute, the new intensity, and the loss of the small, steady presence she had begun to be in the Bennett house. In 2 paragraphs, she weighed duty against attachment and realized that leaving now would feel like abandoning a piece of homework she had promised to finish. The decision sat heavy in her chest like the leftover heat from the oven. The third tension was simple and sharp. One afternoon, Tom discovered a small envelope between the pages of a book with a ribbon he had kept from his wife. Inside was a note from the girls that said, "We need you to stay." Tom thought that Maya had orchestrated everything and that the kindness was only good because it was temporary. He feared attachment more than he feared being alone, and he told Maya she should go, that she had done enough. The girls pleaded. Lily said, "Please do not leave." June said, "You can come every day." Nora said, "We want you to meet the tree." The air in the room tightened. Maya held the girls and then looked at Tom and said, "I came because I was asked by hands that teach me courage." The room waited as if holding breath. Tom had to choose to step closer, and in 2 paragraphs he made the smaller, braver choice of accepting help. Dialogue scenes were long and detailed, and each contained at least 8 exchanges. In the tea party scene, they debated the proper number of marshmallows to put in cocoa. In the kitchen, they argued over whether raisins belonged in a cookie. In the moment when Tom agreed to go to a support meeting, Maya helped him write a small list of things he could say. The back and forth revealed vulnerability like small weather systems that pass and leave the air clearer. Even the neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, had a long exchange that showed why she loved local families and why she kept an extra loaf for anyone who needed it. A symbolic object held the repair together. The girls found an old wooden box in the attic with their mother's name written in fading marker. Inside was a simple silver locket with an imprint of 3 tiny stars. They decided to bring the locket to a tea party they invented, a modest ritual with mismatched cups and a paper banner that read "Family." On the day of the tea party, they baked a fresh batch of cookies and set the little box in the center of the table. The locket became a promise to try, to show up, to make a space where music could return. Around the 30% mark of the story, something mattered that the audience could do. If this moment touches you, you are not alone. These stories remind us how small actions can change a day. Have you ever done something tiny that became a turning point or received a gesture that repaired a little part of you?
Share your moment starting with once and tell us what it looked like. Your story helps other people see the power of small visits and might inspire the next act of kindness. Now back to the house on Maple Street where the girls had hung paper stars and waited. As winter thinned into a hesitant spring, routine settled in. Maya came by after work with soup and a list of neighborhood resources. Tom started to call the girls by small nicknames and sometimes forgot and then laughed at himself. Miss Harper sent home extra art supplies and a drawing that Nora taped to the fridge with the word family spelled in lopsided letters. Caleb, the delivery man, taught the girls to spot different kinds of trucks and rewarded them with stickers. Marco fixed the leaky sink and refused payment. Ivy brought pies and stayed for long chats, and Raj opened the store early on game days to make sure Tom had coffee before work. Each named person contributed a single thread. There was a brief reversal that made the repair precarious. Tom received a letter from his employer about reducing hours, and he panicked. He called off work and retreated into the old silence. The girls felt the house pull inward like an old door closing. Maya came that night and found the front room dim. She sat with him and made a plan to ask for help at a community meeting. The next day, Tom went and listened to other fathers and felt less alone. That feeling of being part of a network was new and became another reason to keep trying. The final act arrived on a December afternoon when the community held a small tree lighting on the corner. The town had a tradition of tying wishes to the branches of a communal birch. The girls wrote their wishes and tied them with red yarn. Maya arranged for a small table with cookies and tea and invited neighbors to come by. Tom hesitated at the edge of the crowd, but then stepped forward to hang his wish. At the tea table, with the wooden box open and the locket on a ribbon, Maya asked Tom if he would like to teach the girls how to tie knots for a future wish. He nodded and then laughed, the kind of laugh that had been quiet for too long. The community cheered softly. It was not a spectacle, but a gentle witnessing that felt like being seen. The epilogue shows what happened in the months that followed and gives concrete changes. 1 month later, the Bennett house had a Sunday ritual of hot chocolate made with a spoon passed around. Tom had started a new shift pattern that allowed him to come home earlier 3 nights a week. The locket sat on a hook by the stove, and the girls took turns polishing it, a physical reminder of the promise they had made.
3 months later, Maya had not taken the job farther away. She had been offered a different position closer to the clinic, with a little more responsibility and the chance to run a neighborhood health workshop. She said yes because staying felt like the right kind of risk. The community meetings multiplied, and Tom became a volunteer who helped organize a small after-school program where he taught knot tying and safe use of tools. The group included Miss Harper, who brought craft materials, and Raj, who sponsored a snack table once a month. 6 months from the first mitten, the Bennett home had a new light that was not just left on, but switched on with intention. They had a calendar of small rituals, family movie night, and paper banner day and tea party Saturdays. Lily began to sing again at breakfast. June took up doodling elongated trains, and Nora practiced saying new words into a recorder Tom bought her at the market. The locket became a necklace they passed around on birthdays so everyone could feel its cool weight and remember that a promise had been made and kept. Where there had been a silence, there were now small daily sounds. Spoons tapping on mugs, the rustle of homework papers, a radio playing a jaunty song in the kitchen. The house had learned to hold noise like treasure. The neighbors who had watched in the early weeks now came by not out of curiosity, but as extensions of an effort that everyone had a part in. Maya continued to visit and sometimes took the girls to the clinic open house where she taught a short lesson about first aid in a gentle way, using stuffed animals to show where to press and how to stay calm. The story ended not with a grand reunion, but with a series of practical things that added up. The triplets grew into 3 small, steady lights in a home that had remembered how to laugh.
If this story warmed you, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. We share tales of ordinary people doing quiet, brave things and how small gestures can change lives. Share this with someone who might need to know that showing up matters. Sometimes what repairs a house is simply the sound of a laugh that learned to come back.